Okay, welcome to, oops, let me just make sure this is down. Yeah, welcome to Chapter 8. We're going to be talking about intellectual property rights today. This chapter, I'm kind of of two minds about this chapter. It's a very valuable chapter to look at. I think because of the nature of the world we're living in, I think intellectual property is something that, well, it's hard for many people to grasp, particularly people of my generation, which are, say, older than 50. It's intellectual property that in many ways is driving in at the core of wealth in this world today. There are several famous examples to look at here. There's the idea of if you take a cell phone and you purchase it for, say, $100, how much of that $100 goes to the manufacturing and the actual physical building of it versus what goes into its creation, its intellectual creation, the ideas behind it, the programming behind it. And you know, one of the kind of shocking things is you're going to find that the vast majority of that price, and again, it can depend upon what actual piece of intellectual property you're talking about, but the vast majority of it, 80, 90%, can be the intellectual property that you're paying for, not the physical object, which really means that physical property is less important, which really kind of causes me to offer you one more digression, and then I promise I will start the slides. One way of looking at the development of the economy is what is called the wave theory. You have the first wave, technological wave, and that was the agricultural revolution. This is where human society moved from hunter-gatherers, where it was very much a communal property. There wasn't a lot of things to own because you weren't a stationary population. You couldn't own a lot of things because everything had to be picked up and moved. But with agriculture, you have the settlement of the cities. You have the development of many of the traits that we associate with civilization. I mean, civitas is literally the root era is city. But then, so that was kind of the first wave. The second wave is the Industrial Revolution. And this is a change, whereas previously the bulk of wealth was seen as concentrated in agriculture because of this first wave. Now, wealth is concentrated in industry. All of a sudden, most people stop being farmers. If you look at the populations of most countries prior to their industrial revolutions, both the United States, somewhat of an exception there, but England, France, Russia, Spain, Portugal, you're going to see that the vast majority of the population are farmers. The Industrial Revolution comes along, and through the application of machines and technology, wealth now is, can you make things in factories? And all of a sudden, you go from having most people employed in agriculture to most people employed in industry. Now, where this ties into our story of intellectual property rights is the third wave. Because at some point, you can draw an arbitrary line, the intellectual creation of things, the creation of ideas, became more important than the physical construction of something. Now, physical construction of something is still important, just like agriculture is still important. But the ability to come up with a new product, the ability to create that, really became central to society. So most advanced societies on the planet today, most of Europe, most of advanced Asia, most of North America, most people are not engaged in agriculture. It's only about 2 or 3% in the United States. They're not engaged in industry. It's only about 10 or so percent, 12%, 15% at the most, depending on how you cut the numbers. They're not even, strictly speaking, engaged in a direct service economy. They're really engaged in intellectual, which leads us to our first topic, intellectual property rights. Okay, so if you're going to create things of the mind and you're going to sell them in the marketplace, there has to be a method to protect it, to recognize it as property. And the way in which that is done is that we have created a theoretical ownership, much like a deed is the theoretical ownership of a piece of land. A trademark, a service mark, copyright, or a patent is the theoretical mark of ownership of an intellectual idea. So, trademarks, very important. These are defined as a distinctive mark, motto, device, implement, drawing, picture, anything you can think of, that are placed on a good to identify them. So, classic example here, Starbucks. You've all seen the little green logo with the Starbucks mermaid on it. It says Starbucks on it. So this is a trademark. When Starbucks sells its coffee in the grocery store for you to brew at home, or when it sells it in a cup, it's going to affix it. And trademarks are protectable. Trademarks can be extremely valuable. The golden arches of McDonald's, Mickey Mouse as a trademark for Disney. All of these are unique and protectable. Starting in 1946, we have the Lamb Act, which codifies a lot of the common law rules about trademark. And in 1995, we had the Federal Trademark Dilution Act, which said you can now sue in federal court if someone sues. And because I used the Starbucks, I include an example here. Someone started to sell coffee in what he called Sam Buck's Coffee House, and was sued by Starbucks. And they said, well, this is ours. And again, since Sam Buck's was later coming in and was really trying to capitalize on Starbucks, well, you can see how their use was making Starbucks trademark less valuable. They were diluting the value of it. You have to register your trademark, and you register it in Washington, D.C. with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. So you say, okay, this is the mark, the motto, the logo, the symbol, the whatever that's going to represent our company or my business. And you don't have to use it immediately, but you should usually use it within 6 months. There are some ways to extend that. But you also give notice that this is a trademark protected item, usually by using a small circle with an R in it. Trademarks need to be distinctive. So one of the most powerful ways you can do this is to create something. Sometimes you create a word. Now, drug companies are famous for this. If you go back 100 years and you stop someone in the street and you said Viagra, they'd say, God bless you, because Viagra is a made-up word. If you use the term Xerox, which is a common term today, some people will say, I'm going to go make a Xerox. And what they're really saying is, I'm going to go make a photocopy or a copy of something. Because that's a made-up word, even if it has a root in other words, you can trademark and protect it. However, you are going to have to guard against that. We're going to use that Xerox in an example just a bit. Now, another way you can do it is you can take words that are already in use, they're not unique, you can string them together and use them in a particular way. So, London Fog is a brand of overcoats. It's trademarked. Now, you can't trademark London, that's a city. You can't trademark fog, that's a weather event. It's like trying to trademark rain. But string them together, and you can, because it becomes a secondary meaning. However, if you have a very, very common word, and you're not stringing it together, and it's not tied to something fanciful, and you're just trying to protect it, you're not going to be able to. Generic words can't have protection. All right. Service marks are like trademarks, but they're for the service of a good. Certification denotes the accuracy of goods, like UL under right or laboratory. Collective marks are used by co-ops or groups to identify things like good housekeeping. All of these can be used not directly for products, but sometimes for services or a guarantee of content. Trade dress. This is when you are presenting your good in a way and you want to protect it. And it works just like a trademark, but the best example by far is the Hershey's Kiss. We've all seen Hershey's Chocolate Kiss. And you cannot manufacture chocolate in that way with that, little comes up little raindrop tip and you wrap foil around it. You can't sell it any other way because Hershey's controls that trade dress. So you can protect that as well. Counterfeit goods. Now, counterfeit goods are a major problem here because if you take intellectual property, making the first thing is very expensive. Coming up with the idea, drawing, creating a logo, creating a campaign. But once you've made it, to copy it is cheap, and therefore it's essentially, a way to make money off of someone else's labor. That's theft. So goods that imitate trademark goods are called counterfeit goods, and we estimate, at least in the United States, that 7% of all trademark goods sold are fake. Now that's going to vary dramatically from industry to industry. There's some things there's going to be virtually no trademark infringement. Do people make John Deere mowers? I assume there's probably a very small percentage that are fake. Yeah, probably 0.0001%. But realistically, no. It's a major manufacturing process. No one's going to paint their mowers, green and yellow and call it John Deere. So there's none there. On the other hand, you take a luxury good like a Louis Vuitton handbag, and you're going to have a lot of counterfeiting there because they're quick to make. You're really ripping off the style of the presentation. In 2006, Congress passed the Stop Counterfeiting Manufacturing Good Act that called for a $2 million fine or 10 years in prison at a maximum. Interestingly enough, it banned both the manufacturing of goods and the manufacturing of labels, because what sometimes people would do is they would make a label not attaching to a good. Well, that's legal. Then they make a good someplace else. They'd ship in the good, attach the label, sell it as a Louis Vuitton. Trade names can be protected. Trademarks can apply to products, trade names, businesses. Most of the time this reflects goodwill. Classic example, Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola. If you run a company, a restaurant in the United States, and you sell Coca-Cola, some fine day, someone's going to walk into that restaurant and say, you're selling Coke, right? I want a Pepsi. And if you serve them a Coca-Cola, saying, here you go, you're going to get a letter from Pepsi. You're probably also going to get one from Coke that says, you sold something you claimed was Pepsi that was in fact Coke. You do this again, we're going to sue you for violation of trade name. The reason for this is both companies like Coke and Pepsi are terrified that, they're selling literally just caramelized sugar water. If they lost control of the trade name, if anybody could sell anything and call it a Coke or a Pepsi, how are they going to make money? Because you're going to dilute it. That's the great danger. So we want things that are fanciful and you can't fake, because again, what can happen is you can lose control of this. So here's a quick example. And I said to get back to this. Xerox does the same thing. Xerox is afraid that its corporate name is going to become just a shorthand in common language for copy. So they are constantly fighting about it. But sometimes companies lose. So, example, you've all been to Crabtree Valley Mall in Raleigh. If you're going from the bottom floor to the top floor of Crabtree Valley Mall, you'll very often take, what would you call it? And I'm waiting for you. I can hear you. Come on. What you would usually call it is an escalator. So you go from the bottom to the top. But its actual name as a generic term is movable stairways. Escalator was a company. Escalator didn't defend its trade name. People started calling all moving stairways escalators. Eventually what happened is when escalator wanted to sue someone or claim that it controlled that word, the court said, no, it's now come into the modern parlance. Everybody uses it. You haven't defended it. Therefore, anybody can call their moving stairway an escalator now. Okay, and there's other examples like that. Aspirin is a good example of that. So a patent is a little bit different. A patent still revolves around intellectual property. It's a grant from the government that gives the inventor up to 20 years, 14 years for designs, but it's going to give them a number of years protection for what they invent. Now you have to show that it's an invention, a discovery, a process that is unique and not obvious. And what you do is you file, and then you give notice that you have a patent or patent pending after your word. Now, not everything can get a patent, but since 1976, we've been putting patents online. It used to be in the old days that you had to submit a application to the patent office in Washington. Very often it called for a model. So there were these wonderful models. There used to be, and it's been years, used to be a museum based on these in Washington, D.C., where all these old models were on display. And even people like Abraham Lincoln had filed for patents about something and would submit these drawings or these models. Now pretty much all this is done online. And there's about 50 million. That number is larger today. So what is patentable? Well, almost anything can be patentable. You can't patent a law against nature, so you can't patent gravity or natural phenomenons or an abstract idea. But you can patent some things that are pretty surprising, like plants, and animals. One of the things that's been going on, partly because CRISPR and a number of other things, is that we're getting much better at breeding and creating new plants and new animals. So very often, people will develop a plant. So you might have someone that produces a specific type of seed, and they will patent that plant. And they're going to be the only people that are allowed to make and grow that plant for that 20-odd years. After that, of course, it'll become open for everybody to use. Same thing can be done with animals. You can patent software, although that's pretty hard. One thing you can do is patent a business process. So you've got companies like Priceline that try to control those things, but a lot of that, again, difficult to enforce those patents. So what's the use of these patents? Well, the big use is, of course, they give you exclusive use or right of use. And what can happen is someone can decide, well, I'm going to do that, even though you created it. And that is called infringement, which is basically a theft. Now, if let's suppose, and there's a very famous example of this, you invent the intermittent windshield wiper. And you say, oh, look, I came up with this brilliant idea. It used to have 2 speeds on window wipers, really, really fast, and so slow it's not doing anything. But instead, I've invented this little toggle that you can put on your windshield wiper motor, and it will turn it up or turn it down. Brilliant idea. So you show it to Ford, GM, Chrysler, which were the big 3 back then, and they say, yeah, we're not really interested in that. And then the next model year, after you've already patented it, they come out with intermittent windshield wipers. Well, the guy, and this actually happened to a man, I think they made a movie out of it, if I'm not mistaken, with Greg Kinnear. This guy sues the big 3 automobile dealers and says, you stole this idea. Now, you got one person suing 3 of the largest corporations in America. At one point, GM was the largest corporation in the world. And you got one little inventor suing them? Good luck. So what he had to do for years and years and years, it took 15, 20 years, eventually he could prove that and could recover money. So you sue in federal court. Now, one thing you can do is you can try to seek an injunction. Tell these people to stop using intermittent wipers. Lately, it's difficult to get these permanent injunctions because we want the benefits of the new technology to play out and let you guys fight about who owns it. Obviously, you're going to seek damages, and you can request court costs. Increasingly, we let large corporations that are basically infringing on patents to continue to do so and wind up paying damages just because it's more of a public good. All right, copyrights are a different creature. Now, a patent kind of, and a trademark, different than a copyright. A copyright is something that, in the classic sense, an author has over his books. So it has been extended to be well beyond that. It's more anything literary or artistic, and we'll talk about the different categories in just a sec. And the length of the copyright has increased dramatically. First of all, it's automatic. If I sat down and I wrote a novel The dark and stormy history of Campbell University night classes. I don't know, make something up. I have an automatic copyright on that. And that copyright is for life, plus up to 70 years. You also can register your copyright with the Copyright Office, and you're going to note that you have a copyright by having a little C inside a circle or the words copyright. So this next chart I included because it shows you how long the copyright has grown. You'll notice that at the beginning of the Republic, if you can see, I don't know if you can see the little arrow that I'm using. One second. Okay, so if you go back and look at the early copyright laws, you'll notice that you pretty much didn't get these very long periods of time. You only got about 20 years and 28 years or so. And then around 1820, that got bumped up to about 40 years. And then by 1870s, got up to about 50 years. And there was this other little brief period here, the 1964 Act. But then by the 1970s, okay, we see a longer period of time. Now we're up to 80. And by today, because remember, you got to project backwards. By today, here's where you go backwards for the number of years. This chart's a little misleading. You'll notice that the Sonny Bono Act, the 1998 Act, keeps a copyright in place for 100 years, 70 years. So you've got stuff that was made back in the 1940s in the United States, 50s, that is still copyrighted, still protected. Okay, what can be copyrighted? The first thing you can copyright is literary works. All right, we've already kind of talked about those, books. Second thing you can copyright is musical works, songs, lyrics to songs, melodies. You get a little bit of trouble with this because a lot of those repeat. Dramatic works, that kind of relate to the other two. Pantomime, or choreographic works, dancing. Pictures, graphics, or sculptures. Film, sound recording, and architectural works. All of those are protectable. And again, if you think about valuable corporations in America today, one of the most valuable corporations in America, the most wealthiest ones, is Disney. And think about what they own. Sure, they have studios, but lots of companies have studios. What do they really own? Well, they own Star Wars. They own Mickey Mouse. They own this vast library of film and dramatic works that a generation of children grow up and then show their own children. So this is something that is, extremely valuable. Again, I can't emphasize enough that most wealth today in the world is not tangible, certainly not agricultural wealth, it's not industrial wealth, it's this intellectual wealth. So how does a copyright work? Well, the protection is essentially automatic once you bring it into existence, not just an idea. You can't say, oh, I have a great idea about a book about a big whale and a sea captain that hunts him. Well, that's not Moby Dick yet. That's just an idea. You can also protect compilation of facts. So, yes, you can protect, say, the Guinness Book of World Records. That would be copyrightable. But interestingly enough, at least when they were being published, you could protect things like phone books. And all this you're going to find in Section 102 of the Copyright Act. Copyright infringement. This is copying some form of an expression or idea here. There are exceptions. Under Section 107 of the Copyright Act, if you are not using this for profit, if it is in an academic section, a fair use doctrine sometimes called, there's quite a bit of leeway you have about using stuff that's out there. So I could quote Moby Dick if I was writing a literary analysis of American literature from 1700 to 1900, and it would be protected. I could go ahead and do it. Also, comedy or satire is protected. It's not under copyright, so you can copy someone to make use of them. This is the example here. Jerry Falwell was a Protestant preacher, ultimately Follow University he created, and very right-wing, very conservative. There was a type of alcohol being sold that was running a campaign, and the campaign was kind of tongue-in-cheek. It said, "The first time." Now, you might think the first time would be the first time you ever had relations, but instead they're referring to the first time you ever had this liqueur. Okay, that was their original campaign. Well, there was a magazine, I'm not even sure it's published anymore, a pornographic magazine called Hustler, that published this article here. Jerry Falwell talks about his first time, and it is not about the first time drinking that liquor. Instead, it's about his first time having relations, sexual relations. So, of course, people go ballistic, and there's all sorts of lawsuits, and it goes to the courts, and the courts say, since it's a satire, the Jerry Falwell isn't protected, he's a public figure, okay? And Campari, which might want to sue because it's diminishing the value of its copyrighted material, they can't sue because it's comedy. So that's why places like Saturday Night Live or, pick your website, are largely protected from copyright violations. Once a copyrighted good is sold to the customer can resell it. But they can't copy it and then resell it. You can only resell the original good. And there was fights about this. So if you sell a DVD of, say, The Mandalorian, the complete first season or whatever, again, we're getting back to Disney, Disney can't say you can't resell that. What you can resell if you have the DVD. Now, you couldn't make 10 copies of it to resell because that's not going to work. Computer Software Copyright Act of 1980. So what can we protect with computer software? As I said, this has got some special rules. Well, you can protect the binary code and the source code. You can protect the program structure. You can protect the sequence and organization, but you can't protect things like its general look or feel, the command structure that goes on, any menus or any video images. None of that's protectable. All right, trade secrets. Trade secrets can be vitally important. So let me give you an example. I used to do some work for lumber companies here in Raleigh. And the valuable things about lumber companies were often the salesman. This was years ago. Markets changed a little bit. The salesman would often have special relationships with different customers. And they would know them. And let's suppose you had, Builder A was going to start a development in Cary. Well, a particular lumber salesman would know, okay, he's going to need, 4 million board feet of lumber. I'll go out and sell it to him. And they would have lists of all of the builders. Well, if they moved from, say, 84 Lumber or Guy C. Lee to Home Depot or another lumber provider, that list that they had stayed with their employer. That was a trade secret, and they weren't allowed to disclose information. Also, what can be protected in a trade secret are plans. If you plan to expand, if you plan to contract, if you are going to do something. Also, research and development secrets can be protected. Marketing techniques, pricing information, extremely valuable. Any unique information held by a seller in a marketplace that would be valuable to a competitor can be part of trade secrets. And we have the Uniform Trade Secrets Act of 1979. Has been adopted by North Carolina, but usually you are going to sign a contract, a non-disclosure contract. And that's usually the way we're going to do that. All right, at that, we're right at half an hour or so. There is going to be one more brief chapter, chapter 9, in tonight's series of lectures. If you're following along, we're going to do 7, 8, and 9 tonight. Other than that, I will talk to you when I record chapter 9.